The modes have quite distinct natures from one another, so that those who hear them are differently affected by each. To the one called Mixolydian, they respond with grief and anxiety, while to another they react with more mellowness of mind. The Dorian mode apparently inspires moderation and firmness, while the Phrygian creates ecstatic excitement. These points have been well expressed by those who have thought deeply about this kind of education. They cull their evidence from the facts themselves. Plato, The Republic, Book 3. I consider that music is, by its very nature, essentially powerless to express anything at all, whether a feeling, an attitude of mind, a psychological mood, or a phenomenon of nature. Expression is simply an attribute we have thrust upon it as a label, a convention, in short, an aspect which we have, by force of habit, come to confuse with its essential being. Igor Stravinsky, An Autobiography. Human responses to musical sounds have been explored for centuries and are inescapably connected with issues of culture, acoustics, psychology, sociology, and evolutionary science. Thus, when we examine the motivations behind Mozart's unusual choice of G minor as the tonality for his 40th symphony, a multidisciplinary approach can provide special insight into this most well-known of the composer's works in the genre, and more broadly, help us understand why composers in the Western classical tradition have chosen particular keys in which to set their individual works. When Mozart was born in January of 1756, the rationalistic values of the Enlightenment were being applied to the study of music with a new intensity. The impulse to deconstruct and define the art within a scientific context inspired a stream of important 18th century theoretical treatises, including works by Rameau, Quantz, C.P.E. Bach, and Mozart's father Leopold that remained valuable. These dissertations explored the nature of musical elements, described how they were most effectively deployed, and codified musical practices of the time. Some theorists built upon the work of their predecessors by focusing special attention on music's power to evoke distinct emotions, looking for patterns in and characteristics of musical syntax that appear to consistently elicit these involuntary responses. A particularly influential treatise was The Perfect Kapellmeister by Handel's erstwhile friend Johann Mattheson. Published in 1739, this mostly descriptive theoretical work promoted the concept of a doctrine of affections, in which forms of musical rhetoric were explicitly connected to various emotional states or affects. Such categorizations of melodic patterns, rhythms, and harmonies according to their affective associations became commonplace, and musical keys were similarly classified, sometimes to the point of absurdity. In one widely read work from the mid-1780s, key characters were described with adjectives such as pure, brooding, complacent, rustic, and even womanly. But most of these designations had little practical value. During Mozart's lifetime, the question of how to tune keyboards and other instruments with fixed pitches was unsettled. Since the achievement of pure intonation across the entire range of these instruments is an acoustic impossibility, various tuning systems, or temperaments, were developed. In Mozart's day, it was common to employ temperaments that would create relatively pure intonation within a limited number of keys. Composers generally observed these limitations, rarely writing works in a key with more than 3 sharps or flats. Even if the key of A-flat minor, with its 7 flats, was the most effective setting for expressing, as one writer described, grumbling, wailing lament, a sense of the heart being suffocated, its use was completely impractical. This changed when equal temperament became the de facto standard during the 19th century. In this system, each adjacent pair of notes is separated by the same frequency interval, spreading the impurities across the instrument's range and essentially diluting them to a point at which they're tolerable. This system allows for complete flexibility in modulation and key selection. It also effectively undermined the theory that musical keys contain specific affective characteristics. A tragic work for piano in C minor could be easily transposed to any other minor key and sound equally heartbreaking. And yet, it would be simplistic to conclude that the long-standing association of G minor with Mozart's most sorrowful musical expressions is merely a matter of convention. He employed the key in 16 different works or movements, and the texts of the vocal pieces within this group almost invariably express feelings of loss and despair. Among his 41 symphonies, only 2 were set in a minor key, number 40 and number 25, both of them in G minor. This affinity wasn't arbitrary. The 2 most important notes in a G minor scale or chord, the root tone G and the pitch D that sits atop the scale's 5th step, also constitute half the pitches of the free-ringing open strings of the instruments in the conventional symphonic string section, with G being the lowest string on the violin and the middle strings of the viola and cello being tuned to G and D. The key of G minor has a characteristic sound in a symphonic context. The slightly muted resonance of the minor mode is permeated with a sonority of open strings tuned to the key's most fundamental pitches, resulting in a collectively produced timbre that is resonant and full without being edgy. These attributes would have been immediately apparent to a sonic poet such as Mozart, whose psychological insight into the expressive potential of sound remains unsurpassed. His transformation of basic musical structures into platforms for many of Western culture's most profound, lively, and humane artistic utterances is a defining characteristic of his music, a quality that's succinctly captured in a quote attributed to Lao Tzu. "To see things in the seed, that is genius."